the cave closes behind you suddenly. All is blackness around you. And you see your companions around you, but you start to feel that panic that you did, like when you were a child. You feel it coming up. You see the orcs that were coming down towards you, getting closer and closer as the panic starts to rise in your throat. When suddenly your friend puts a hand on your arm saying, "Are you okay? It was just a cave-in. We're fine." You shake it off, realizing the orcs aren't there. They're just in your imagination. Hi there, Dr. Megan Connell, and this is Psychology at the Table. In this episode, we're going to be talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, and things that you can do as a dungeon master to be accommodating to a player who has PTSD at your table. Now, in this series, I've been talking about these things on my own, but I decided to change it up a little bit and bring some of my colleagues in. So today, I want to welcome Jen Fights, professional counselor, to come in and help talk about PTSD, as this is one of her areas of expertise. So,
hello!
Welcome!
Thank you! Excited to be here.
Great to have you. So, first off, can you tell me a little bit about exactly what is PTSD?
So, working definition is a person who has either personally themselves experienced or witnessed somebody else experienced or heard of a really negative life event. Some of my clients don't love the word trauma, so sometimes I use the word negative life event that's happened to a loved one that they then hear about. And as a result of that, then, and I think it's important to differentiate between having a traumatic event and developing PTSD. Because you can have a traumatic event happen in your life and not necessarily develop PTSD. So that opening part is the same for everybody, right? A negative life event happens, or we hear something happening to a loved one. Then I think what takes it from experiencing a traumatic event into PTSD is then what happens next. So we say it's not about just what happened, it's about what happened next. And you have avoidance symptoms. I don't want to go to the same places I used to. I don't want to be around the same people I used to. Or cognitive stuff starts to go on, things with your thinking. I'm a bad person. Or it was my fault. Or I'm really stupid. So you see some of these shifts in the way that you live your life, or the way that you used to be involved in things in your life, or the way that your relationships sort of change. So my working definition for clients is, yes, we have this negative life event, but then after that, all of these pieces of my life are drastically different. My character is different. My relationships are different than how they used to be.
Okay, so it's something that you see as an event you have, and then that's something that changes you, and then how you react going forward is where we're seeing more of the PTSD. So, what are some things that you might see as far as symptoms with PTSD? So, not as experiencing as a person, since we're trying to help people who are, have a friend who might be struggling. So, what would be some things that would maybe clue you in that your friend might be struggling with this?
I think one of the biggest things that you would begin to see is withdrawal. I used to see you 3 times a week, and now I hardly see you anymore. So you're noticing that this person is pulling back. Maybe if you are spending time, they seem distracted. Like that, or they get lost in their thoughts quickly and easily. You may see them become more anxious if they are out in public, in restaurants or in crowds, things that you used to do. You notice them, looking around a little bit more. We call it hypervigilance, where people become very aware of their surroundings. You may see irritability. They used to sort of have a sense of humor. Now they can't seem to laugh at a joke. See, those kinds of things that you notice that are the external part of PTSD.
And also, what if you're getting to know somebody who already has PTSD? So you've started because what can happen sometimes at the gaming table is you'll invite people to play, and then somebody who already has PTSD and you don't know that. So what might be some clues or things that you might witness at the table that could clue you in that they're struggling with this?
Maybe an emotional response that you don't expect, or that may seem a little bit bigger than what you would sort of maybe stereotypically expect. So maybe a quicker response, or maybe like, well, what did you mean by that? Or, so I think it would be a little bit of that. Well, here's what I think it would normally look like when you were describing that opening scene with the orcs and somebody being like, oh, and for a person with PTSD, they really may be showing on their face like an affective response to whatever it is that you're saying. So you may just sort of notice some of those differences. Maybe you do notice that they jump or startle easily. So I would think those would be a couple of things that you would maybe notice just in looking at a person.
Okay. If you're noticing these things, what would be some tactful ways that you would maybe suggest bringing it up or addressing the issue with them?
Well, I think I could probably start with what would not be a tactful response, which would maybe be something like, what's wrong with you? Or like, dude, you okay? Like sort of overtly drawing attention to whatever the difference is can then make people, a lot of times with people who struggle with PTSD, shame floats in there somewhere. And so trying to not put them in a position where they feel like something else is wrong with them. So maybe a gentle touch on the arm and maybe just a check in being like, hey, how you doing? Maybe trying to connect, making sure that they're looking at face, that they're looking at eyes, that they're okay.
Okay. Now, what if somebody was to have like a full flashback at the table or something? So, you're doing in D&D, one of the things we do, or in a lot of role-playing games, it's, you're dealing with a lot of violent stuff and some bad things. And so sometimes, like, you could say something, and again, people with PTSD often don't go around, that's their diagnosis, and here's
carrying
my
it around
trauma.
on a little plaque on their chest.
So, like, if you accidentally stumble into something that causes that really big reaction.
I think what is interesting is that to remind yourself that you may not know what's all that is going on inside their head. And so to not make any assumptions about what that looks like or what they're experiencing. So maybe using some sort of light touch. Now remember, depending on what the person's circumstance is, that may be reactive to them. But we talk about trying to, when somebody's having a flashback, to try to ground them back in reality. So that can look like a gentle, just calling them by their name. Hey, Megan. Just calling them quietly by their name, maybe a gentle touch on the arm, maybe a slight rap on the table as you're playing at the game. But I think, again, it's the idea that if you see them start to really struggle, we want to try to bring them back into the room, back into the reality, back into a place where they obviously feel safe. They're here because they enjoy this or it means something to them. So we're trying to bring them a little bit back into the now, I would sort of say.
Okay. And would you probably, like, taking a break from the game at that moment?
Yes.
Them one-on-one.
So I think at that moment, it's sort of like that momentary response, just trying to bring them back and then saying, why don't we all just take 5, everybody take a bathroom break, grab a bottle of water, and then try to just touch base with them. Can you help me understand? And so as opposed to, again, using that language, it's like, what's wrong with you? What just happened to you? Hey, I was noticing that you seemed to be a little disconnected from what we were doing. Can you help me understand maybe what you were experiencing? Or can you help me understand what about what we were doing was maybe difficult for you or triggered you a little bit?
Yeah. No, I think that's good. And I think one thing to remember too is, again, like, as a dungeon master, you are not their therapist. That's not the job here. We're giving you some tools if this does happen for you. But it's talking about, when you understand, like, okay, what was it that was triggering? It was, maybe hearing about the village burning down and getting that description. And, as a dungeon master, I think one of the things that's important to understand is, like, that doesn't mean you can never bring stuff up like that in game, but you might have to just adjust how you talk about it. So rather than
or even preparedness, and I was just thinking as you were talking that maybe some of it is, and you may not know, like Megan said at the outset of a game, that a person is struggling with this. But once you do, maybe try to front load a little bit with them. Let them know, hey, this is sort of the direction tonight. Maybe with D&D, you're not going to always let everyone know, but just a little bit of like, hey, this may be the direction that we're heading today. Or I think that communication piece is so huge. Don't make any assumptions. Communicate with your players. Let them know that it's okay for them to be honest about how they're doing and about how they're feeling. And that you just need to ask open-ended, try to be as non-judgmental as possible kind of questions.
Yeah, my dungeon master there, who I play with, we are dealing with a very dark story arc right now. And he's actually been very good about it, of sending us all a message of like, hey, just a heads up, there's going to be some of X, Y, and Z tonight. If it gets too much, just send me a message and I'll tone it back or whatever. And so that's, and I think that's a really good message for anybody out there too, is just, if you are going to be encountering some big trauma stuff that you think could be triggering for people, and thinking about the rates of PTSD too, it's not all that uncommon in the population.
It's really not. And again, that idea that there is a gray area between experiencing a traumatic event and having full-blown PTSD. Yeah. So you can have a person that maybe has something in their past and won't even really know until their DM brings it up and they're like, whoa, and it comes back for them. So just being, able to recognize that everybody has different life experiences and has different means to cope and then different ways that they respond.
Right. And now I think we would be kind of recluse to not say, like, what would your guidance be for someone who is dungeon mastering and their friend comes up and says, I have gone through this traumatic thing and I want to re-go through it in the game so I can have like a victory, or I can get, win the day on that.
Well, I think first of all, that would take a lot of bravery from somebody to be able to do. And that is coming from a place of wanting to move forward in health. And so I think validating, like, wow, that's so great that you've hit this point and that you want to do this and you want to gain mastery over these fears, or but I think to second something that you said earlier, you're not this person's therapist. And so be very careful. I would just, this is one of those moments where I would say tread lightly and to remember your own responsibility, that if they just want to say, hey, can we explore an arc in this kind of way? I want to move in this direction. I think my character would then get the opportunity to do X, Y, and Z. Can we do that? That sounds safe to me. Okay. As long as, and I would sort of maybe set a guideline, as long as you communicate openly with me, maybe we come up with a little bit of a hand signal or some sort of tell. I'm going over to poker, my days of poker. Some sort of tell, as long as you communicate with me, I'm willing to go there. If somebody comes up to you and says, I want to do exactly this, and I want my character to be able to do exactly that, I would maybe say, okay, tell me a little bit more about why. And maybe explore a little bit. Well, what would happen if your character didn't?
So I think, one thing to remember is that it can all come down to just a roll of the dice.
And I think that that's an important thing to maybe bring into the conversation, that if they come to you and they really pointedly want X, Y, and Z to happen, to maybe bring up the other side of being like, wow, and again, a little bit of that validation piece, I could see that this is a really big deal to you. And what do you think would maybe happen if your character didn't get to do what you want to do? Because at the end of the day, we roll this dice and X, Y, and Z happens. Do you think you'd be more discouraged? Do you think you would feel more defeated? Or do you feel like you would be like, no, this idea of it's out of my control? Because a lot of some of the PTSD symptoms and what people experience who've had these traumatic events is a real feeling like of being out of control of their own life.
Yeah.
And so, wow, I can guide my character through this interaction and feel like I'm regaining some control. Well, maybe they were already okay with the concept of, but I am okay if the dice sort of controls us, because then it really is fate. It's not some sort of failure on my part or some sort of failure on, I don't know, my neighbor that didn't do anything. Or, like those kinds of thoughts. It's like, no, I'm okay with the dice being in control. So again, I think it comes back to that open communication.
Yeah. Again, talk to your players. Session 0. Always talk to your players. Yeah. And I think too, as a DM, like if you feel uncomfortable with it, like you feel like you can't handle it, you can't handle it. Like it's okay for you to say, I'm not comfortable.
And I think that's great. And I think that, especially as a DM, the players are looking to you to guide. And I mean, I think that carries with it, and I don't want to be overly dramatic, but like a sense of responsibility. So trust your own sense. If somebody says to you, like, I really want to do this, and obviously that carries a lot of weight for that person, and I want my character to be able to do this. If something resonates in you, or you're like, oh man, I don't really think this is in the best interest of our entire group, or I don't think I'm up for this, to be able to say, I think that's really great. And maybe, and I don't know some of how, some of your groups may be, long time groups, and there's lots of trusted relationships and friendships. Be like, well, why don't we go and grab a cup of coffee or go have a beer and talk about it a little bit more, or something like that.
Yeah.
And maybe you can explore it a little bit more, maybe make it work.
Yeah. Yeah. And just, again, be willing to adapt. And also, like, just because you say yes in the beginning doesn't mean you can't change your mind. Like, if you see it becoming a bigger issue now. And like I've talked about in other videos, if you think your player is really struggling, to help them reach out and get that help, and to find somebody who has expertise in that area, and to, help get them connected with those resources. But again, just because somebody struggles with this doesn't mean that it's a no-go for being at the table. They can still play, they can still have fun.
And they can bring a lot to it.
Yeah.
They can bring a lot to the table.
Well, because I think one of the best parts about D&D, too, is that it really can elicit real emotions. You feel really connected to your characters, and, it can be very healing. So, again, any final thoughts or anything else that you would think would be important for Dungeon Masters to know about PTSD and how to be supportive of players who might be struggling with it?
I mean, I think it's the two things that really come into my head are open communication and the need to just check in, sort of non-judgmental thinking and language, not a whole lot of like, oh my gosh, what's wrong, using sort of that language that imposes, and then no assumptions. Don't assume a person is more of this or less of that based on what they share.
Yeah. And I think one of those things with the non-judgmental language that I've found as a phrase that works really well is just like, wow. Just to sit and just go, okay, yeah, that is a lot. And you don't have to say, like, I know how you feel, or I completely understand.
I would probably say, don't say I know how you feel.
Yeah,
that could be triggering for people. But I think that's right. I think sometimes people try to say too much. That it really is okay to say, wow, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that happened to you, or I'm so sorry you had that experience. And it's okay to say, wow, I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And that's not, from the idea of like, oh my gosh, that's so big, you're so broken, I don't know what to say, but to be like, wow, let me think about what you said for a second. That's a lot. Yeah. I don't know what to say other than I'm so sorry, first of all, that happened to you. And that you don't have to come up with the perfect words. Because again, you're not this person's therapist, right? You're technically like a friend.
Yes.
So I think, how would a friend respond? Just being able to be okay with it.
Yeah, yeah. And again, is something else we've talked about in other videos is you don't have to fix it. Just to sit with it, and that can be something helpful. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Yes, this was really exciting to be here. I'm excited. Thank you.
Well, hopefully we can have you back on in the future.
Yes, I would love that. Anytime. And
I hope this was helpful for you. If you guys have other follow-up questions, please leave comments below. And as always, let's make space at the table for everybody.